But I personally knew and felt that we needed Mr. David Marsh to come to the Balearic Islands, and precisely at this moment. We needed his expertise to bring some light to the concept of ICLE. We are fully aware of the educational times we are experiencing nowadays, and we also agree on the need of voices of experts who can talk about what it can be considered a good, clear implementation. APABAL launched an announcement on that sense. That's to say that we thought that what should be done with CLIL, and we wrote about that. Let me now introduce Mr. David Marsh. He's at the moment a lead expert at the University of Jyväskylä, Finland. He's an educator, an analyst, and a project manager. He specializes in realizing educational innovation and development. Working inside Finnish education for 25 years, he also has hands-on experience of short and long-term assignments globally. He has visited different countries and implemented different assignments in Africa, East Asia, Middle East, the USA, the Estonian Educational Science, for example, and he has an honorary doctorate from Valencia International University from this year, 2013, right? His expertise is on developing competence-based teaching and learning practices, or leading, monitoring and evaluating educational development projects and programs, or applying field research outcomes, collaborating with stakeholders and providing in-country support. As I said, he's an evaluator. He's also a project manager for the European Commission. He has been working as a research team coordinator in different projects, and coordinator also in different countries. He has also written different books. For example, The Clear Trajectory, Educational Innovation for the 21st Century, or The Higher Education English Language Landscape, Ensuring Quality in English Language Degree Programs, Uncovering CLIL, this is quite famous, I have this one, Integrated Learning and Bilingual and Multilingual Education, or Content and Language Integrated Learning. So these books have become very popular, and all people working on CLIL, we have all these books with him. Right, so thank you very much, and I imagine we are looking forward to listening to him.
Thank you very much, Monsieur. There's a great amount of understanding now about how to do this, about when to do this, in relation to different languages, about which topics or which themes are particularly suitable for which children. There is no blueprint, because the situation in a primary school in Mallorca is actually very different to a situation in Andalusia, and it's certainly very different to Lima in Peru. So those issues that need to be tweaked or looked at and finely tuned are different in different places. But the key issues that need to be addressed to do this successfully probably remain the same. And I've tried, in a relatively, perhaps crude way, to put those onto one piece of paper, and those are in your folders, but please don't look at them now. Are you ready for a test? Yeah? Okay. What we need somebody up here to check the assessment results. So would you ladies like to stand up, yeah? And look at this, okay. CLIL is fundamentally about... This is going to be one of those lectures I can see at home. CLIL is fundamentally about scaffolding. And scaffolding is not an empty word. Scaffolding is very, very interesting, and it's absolutely integral to doing CLIL properly. Here is an unscaffolded lesson. Have you got the paper in your hand? You may have seen this before, okay? Let's try it, okay? Turn the paper one way and fold it, yeah? Okay. Turn it once again and fold it. Come on, hurry up, monkeys can do it. Rip off the top right-hand corner, Put the paper in your pocket so APABAL doesn't get fined for the cleaning up operation after the conference. Just turn it one more time. Are you with me? Are you with me? Come on, come on. And rip off the top right-hand corner and don't break your nails. Alright. A hurried, tricky, silly game lesson, but a very interesting one because I gave you hardly any genuine support for what is a very demanding task without the failure rate in the group. Talk about innovation in education. You need to know why do we want to do it. We we wanted to maximize absolute success right across the whole audience here, all of you, the good, the bad, and the seriously smart, okay? And we achieved that. We actually achieved that. It may have taken us a bit more time. We may have done it in an unorthodox way, but with that very silly, tricky game, we actually achieved maximum success in what we were doing. And when we look at CLIL curriculum, we have to look at two things. One, why are we doing this? How are we going to do it? And put the two things together. Now, to go back to the good practice, the scaffolding issue is as follows. The word, people think often at the word level. The students need to know the words. But they also need to know those phrases by which to accomplish quite demanding things. And it is linking those words, the kind of discourse phrases, in order to achieve the classic, knowing, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. They need to have the phrases in order to do that in what has been called JIT. That is not a Japanese airline, it means just in time. Just in time. So when a CLIL teacher is in a lesson on the mountains or on the polar circle or whatever, what they're doing is they are ensuring that the words are there, yes, but also that the phrases are there, and preferably that the imaging is there as well. The imaging has become much more important since the 1960s and 70s, when it was found to be a key success factor in Canadian immersion. Okay? How come the immersion results were so good? It was one reason was because for the first time teachers started bringing in more images to support their learning. But since the 1970s the world has changed, and these kids in our classrooms now, and actually some of the young people in this room now, have been brought up in a culture of imagery, and so the images are ever more important. What were the three images on the last screen? One, what were they? Apple computers.
The
Beatles Apple record, okay. The imprinting from the image, when it comes at the same time as the word and the concept, is absolutely fascinating in terms of the brain, and we will come back to that one later. If we are to successfully teach English, or teach through English, or do both, we need to be an excellent teacher. That's what we found. We need to actually be a seriously good teacher. And what I liked about this conversation, I was partly overheard, I only heard fragments on the plane, was that, it's true. Primary school teachers are extremely important in terms of understanding how children work and how children think. And it is a tragedy that our higher education systems have tried to train so-called subject teachers in slightly different ways. And this primary school teaching, this idea that actually every teacher is a language teacher, is something that every one of you will want if you are a parent and you have a child in school. when you look at CLIL, you actually see some of those fundamental principles of primary education continuing on through the ages. If you look at the difference between a good and a bad teacher, and there are various big studies which have looked at this, the difference is absolutely huge. The difference is quite huge. It's like a 60% difference in student outcomes between a poor teacher and an outstanding teacher. How many of you in this room are outstanding teachers? Okay, I heard that modesty is a cultural characteristic of the PLENARY climate. Okay. In other words, in the early days of CLIL, in those countries where it came from, we talked about it being a honeymoon period. We said, you know, this is actually too good to be true. We said the results are too good. And it's taken about 15 years now for cynics and critics. It's a lovely word, critic, isn't it? Can you say that? Critic. How do you say that in Catalan? How do you say it in Spanish? It was John Sibelius, the famous Finnish gentleman, who said, "Don't worry about critics. They don't build statues for critics in life." In the recent years, there's been quite a lot of criticism coming in terms of CLIL, in the press and in the media and in academic circles, and this is something that we will touch on later if you like. But the reason for the criticism is not necessarily justifiable in terms of real, genuine CLIL practice. There is a lot of confusion about what CLIL is. People think that if I simply teach in another language, usually English, in Japan, in Spain, in Bogota, then it's CLIL. No. That was never the case. That's click, if you like, or that's teaching content in English. CLIL has always been what happens in the classroom in order to make this thing work. So if I'm teaching geography in English, next door school, I may be teaching geography in English. At the school over there, I may be actually doing CLIL. If I'm doing CLIL, I probably am learning how to become an even better teacher. And if I'm doing CLIL, what I'm learning is actually going to be as valuable for the teaching that I'm doing in the foreign language or the second language as well as in my first language. And the idea or the conception at the moment of where this thing is going is that within certain countries within the European Union, doesn't matter which ones, that actually bilingual experience at school will become mainstream. That it will actually, what is happening, for example, in naturally bilingual environments, such as close to here, will actually be replicated in quite many countries. The big countries will have big problems with this. The United Kingdom has tried with CLIL and they have failed because of a kind of basically political reasons, you know? Fast solutions and then forget them. Fast solutions, forget them. And the United Kingdom's acronym for CLIL was such a common, they didn't want to use CLIL. Okay? Why? Why? Well, I won't explain why, but they felt it was slightly rude. So they decided to call it ILL, I-L-L, which is, I think, a substantially worse acronym. ILL. It's integrating language learning, I think, that's how it works, but anyway. So there are countries in the world where this is growing. If you look at it globally, teaching through English is expanding at a huge rate, at a huge pace. And you can see that there are whole countries, Ecuador, Colombia, Ecuador, everything. Every single government school is required to be teaching in English soon. Colombia, Argentina, all across Latin America, there's a big shift towards teaching through English. This is very interesting professionally, because, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, there is such a hunger for primary school teachers or secondary school teachers who can teach through English, that actually for the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, the Australians, the whole world is opening up in a way that was never there before. So actually the whole issue of I can show that I know how to do this is actually a very interesting professional development. High-performing countries in the world, and this is a very interesting study, which is based on 50 years of performance. You'll see that there are some countries which are really going downhill quite fast. Norway, Italy, France, Sweden in particular. And then you'll see some countries like Finland, otherwise known as Funland, have been steady, but also Japan, Australia, New Zealand. You'll see some countries that are going down and some countries coming up very fast. And if you look at the studies behind these, such as PISA, such as TIMSS, the mathematics, and such as PEARLS, the literacy, you will find that there are some things that are happening in common in those countries. It is quite true that Korea is entirely different to the north of Europe. But it is also true that the essence of good practice, the core within the apple, is the same. It may be manifested in a different way, but it is the same. I've worked in Korea off and on. I have tried to encourage communicative language teaching and all these nice things to do with languages, and it's a disaster. Why? Because Korean parents are so competitive that they don't want their children to be playing silly communicative games. They want you to teach them so they get through the exams and they get into university. It's very hard to introduce something in an environment like that. But having said that, there are certain similarities between these countries. And these similarities relate to things such as the recognition that we have to change what we're doing, which most countries in the European Union talk about, but they don't do. The emphasis on competence-based building, and the recognition also of the need to actually make change happen in a way which is interactive and which is dialogic. And that brings us to Vygotsky, Brunner, Piaget, and the essence of socio-constructivist methodology. So if you want to talk about CLIL, you're talking about a highly interactive methodology which has been in English language teaching for a long time. Yeah? But it is no matter how good an English language teacher you are in the room if you don't have the time to develop those skills with the students, and if the kids have a negative attitude towards learning English in the first place, or they have a negative attitude to themselves as language learners. There are two subjects in the curriculum which are very sensitive to emotion. Yeah? So if I think, oh, I'm not very good at... What subjects are there? Maths and language. Maths and language, okay? The thing about Finland is that it is one of the freest educational systems that I know of, where children are absolutely free, where all the teachers play the same tune in terms of interactive methodology, where teachers are highly respected, and where the schools are a joy to be in. Oh, there are problems, sure there are problems, many. But overall, it is a very interesting place in which to work and in which to learn. And the schools are happy, joyful little places. How is it possible? The attitudes of the students are overwhelmingly positive towards being at school. The power of digital devices, the amount of time that we are spending using these devices, is having a profound impact on us and our preferred learning styles. That means that actually there's like a new language or a new literacy in the air, and some people call that digital. If you introduce a trilingual learning experience for children from kindergarten through to secondary, you are probably enhancing their skills as literate people. If you are fluent in Catalan and Castilian, you will have advantages which a monolingual will not have. If you are fluent in Catalan, Castilian and English, you will have probably more enhanced fluency. And if you are fluent in Catalan, Castilian and Chinese, you'll probably be even greater. But there is something about the world now and language and literacy which makes the whole issue of integrating languages ever more significant. I don't want to say any more about it. If you're interested, take a look at 21st Language Horizons or language. But there are people, many people who have claimed that our educational systems have become so old-fashioned so quickly in certain subjects, that these young people are getting increasingly bored out of their brains, which is leading them into more bad behavior. It's leading them into more rejection of what a good teacher and a quality education system can offer them. And this is not just empty talk. I think it's a very, very fundamentally real issue. English language teaching has been, I would claim, I'm a teacher, I was trained in English language as well. I would claim English language teaching is one, or has been for many years, one of the most developed teaching, what do you call it now? Professional group? Are you professional? Yeah. Are you a group? All right. What about in school history? Yes, there are fantastic things happening in physics, chemistry, and so on, but they tend to be fairly limited to certain people. But English language teaching has been very, very advanced. And if you look now at what these young people need, then it is a highly interactive, inspiring, and exciting way of teaching and learning. Teaching in another language can be a very clever idea, and I think it is. I actually genuinely think we should be giving as many youngsters as possible the privilege of a bilingual education, or when you have a bilingual community, the privilege of a trilingual education. But we have to also take into consideration the realities that we have. Sorry, no mind. If you look at this, on the left-hand side, you have this is actually supposed to be a Spanish brain. The Spanish brain, and the yellow is the Spanish and the green is the English. Okay? And in the middle, you have the brain of somebody who learnt English from the age of around 12. And on the right-hand side, you have the brain of a person who learnt English as a second language from the age of about 15. All right? Can you see the difference between them? Okay. The difference between them is the amount of overlapping. Now, this is what this picture is supposed to show. So what these researchers and many others like them who are replicating this is that they're saying, if you have the opportunity to learn another language from a young age, it is more likely that the two languages will overlap. And that means that they actually support each other, so that when you're thinking about how am I going to get around this traffic jam in Palma this morning, you're actually using both actively in your problem solving. Whereas, if you learn a language like I did, and in Japan recently they were talking about a revolutionary idea of actually introducing learning through English at a very young age. And I found out that that young age was something like 12. Here, the two things are separate. This is me. This is my brain, definitely. With Finnish, with French and Malay, which I learned some years ago. They were always kind of separated. I had to switch into one language and switch out of Finland, otherwise known as Funland. I can assure you the teaching of English is probably not much better than anything here. The ability to speak English is profoundly better. The average 18 or 19-year-old Finnish young person who has finished high school, academic high school, means that they have a vocabulary, a vocabulary range of around 20,000 words in English. That is absolutely phenomenal. And they have not learnt that from their English classes, which still have teachers who absolutely underestimate their ability and knowledge in the language. They've learnt it because of their access to the internet. Okay? What's happening is that the ability to actually think is becoming more acute with these youngsters, which is why we need to rethink. Can we give them more challenging tasks than we have been doing, so long as we provide the lexical, the conceptual, and the other forms of scaffolding which they require? In other words, when we're teaching grade 2, and we are constantly scaffolding the learning of those children and constantly developing their language, we need to be replicating some of that at grade 5 and at grade 9 and at grade 12. We really need to maximize it. But you can't do that if you say, oh, well, I've got so much to teach, I don't have time for this. We've got to ask ourselves, shall we cut back the amount of stuff that we have to get into their heads? And shall we actually go for quality? Finnish school days are some of the shortest in the European Union, if not the shortest. The amount of time a child spends in school is some of the shortest. And the amount of work, if you go into a Finnish classroom, you just say, wow, I'd love to be a teacher here. Because the teacher's basically pretty laid back and not talking very much, because the kids are constantly doing the teaching themselves. It's a phenomenal approach which can only work if everybody plays the same tune. Just as if teaching through the medium of English in the Balearic Islands is actually going to be successful in the long term, it does mean that the community of practitioners who are doing it need to be a community. They absolutely need to be a community, and there needs to be a coherence, not only of why are we doing this, but how are we doing it and so forth. And then it is possible to raise the demand of the thinking that these youngsters are actually capable of. Okay. In the 1950s, a man called William Mackay did research on the introduction of learning through another language in Northern America. And he came up with a very simple formula. What is the situation? How are you going to do it? And what do you think the outcomes are going to be? And he built under that a whole set of issues that need to be thought about in order to make the introduction of bi- or trilingual schools successful. And on that one-page sheet that you have, what I've done is I've tried to put together with some colleagues from mainland Spain who are experienced in this, some of those key issues which need to be addressed in a European setting, okay? In a European setting like that. Very often, this thing is introduced by force because of pressure from outside. We talked about crises. We talked about problems. When you have your problem with a PowerPoint, you have to be innovative and you have to do something to keep the natives calm. You have to be creative. We are in a crisis. Spain is in a crisis. Finland actually is now in a crisis. And the PISA results will come out on 3rd of December or 6th. And I can assure you, Finland will have slumped. The sun is shining on Finland. We're going downhill very, very fast, economically and God knows what. We're in a crisis. We need a situation. Spanish educational outcomes are not good. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Spanish teachers are good. Is that fair to say? The foreign providers who are here with their stands outside, they're good. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Okay. So everything's so good. Why is it the results are so poor? It's because even the best of ideas will go wrong if they're not allowed to grow in an embryonic way. And I think I can see this now where CLIL is working in Spain and where it's not working in Spain. The recent criticism of CLIL is 10 years late. I thought it would come 10 years ago. CLIL has threatened the English language teaching industry. Most of you in this room are probably in that profession, but CLIL has threatened it. Why? Principally because the ownership of the language is shifted from the person from Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, to Tom, Dick and Harry who speak the language and use the language. And that is a fundamental problem for an industry which makes so much money out of claiming the ownership. I would never ever use the term native speaker again. I don't like the term native speaker. I've never liked the term native speaker. Because how can you say that I'm a native speaker? You're a native speaker. What are you a native speaker of?
Spanish.
She's a native speaker of Spanish, but nobody calls her a native speaker. And just, can I borrow your phone a minute? Oh yeah, Korean. Okay. She's a native speaker of Spanish. CLIL has threatened the status quo. Okay? Somebody asked me once in the commission, how come CLIL has been so successful, so fast? And by the way, I am not the inventor of CLIL. People have called me Mr. CLIL in the past, and I said, well, if I'm Mr. CLIL, then who is Mrs. CLIL, you know? But that's not true. There was a large group of people who I led. I was coordinating them. But the term came up. I didn't like the term. I thought, can't we do better than this? CLIL, CLIL. But that is the case. When we look at CLIL, it does invite. What? Just looking at this water here. I thought this water here was to do with the air conditioning, isn't it? Is it to help the speaker's voice become more mild? Something like that. Look, here's the world, okay. We take a couple of cups. Imagine, then you've got this water here, okay. It is water, is it? If the world is pushing towards learning through English very, very fast, okay? And the way it's doing it is not to provide sufficient language and conceptual support. Okay, so if you imagine that this is the conceptual scaffolding, okay, and this, I'm sorry about this water, but this water is like the classroom language, right? And this one is the linguistic scaffolding. Then what you've got is you've got children who may well be newcomers into the islands, whose Catalan or Castilian is very poor, who are learning through English, quite happily, thank you very much. You've got children with special learning needs, of which is a huge spectrum, who might also traditionally have been told, maybe you shouldn't be learning through English, dear, because your first language is not very good. You've got so many problems. Why bring in more problems with English? And the result with those youngsters has been absolutely fantastic, because what you have is, you have a teacher who is using those basic principles of powerful scaffolding right from the very beginning. And this is okay. And the child, trust me, I know what I'm doing. And so if it's the student can happily, now they are high enough, can happily sit there and can learn in that environment safely and comfortably, with positive emotion, with positive self-confidence, and in an enriched way, because when those images power those words into those concepts, it really is accelerating their ability to learn. But most of the world doesn't have the scaffolding, okay? You'd be amazed at how many teachers really don't care very much, and how many of them do what I'm doing, which is talking too much. And so what you get is, and I'm going to use the word immersion here, but I'm not talking about the immersion method, all right? What you get is, look here, if you want to come to my lesson, you're going to have to do it my way, and you're going to just like sink or swim. Oh. It was old, wasn't it? It was my phone. It's an old phone. Sink or swim, and that is the essence of very bad learning through, very poor learning through an additional language, and that is by far the most common way in which this thing is happening. So when this CLIL gets a bad press, it's because people are saying we are a CLIL school, but they're not actually changing the methodology in the classrooms, and they're not providing the language support. So what we've had in the past is a tremendous resistance to change. We've now got some profoundly exciting and interesting research on school practice, primary practice, secondary practice. We've got a lot of bad research, but it doesn't matter. We've got the brain research, and we've got a fundamental understanding we didn't have before about why it is worth doing this, how much is good in 1 year, what percentage, what subjects are particularly good for what children, and I think what we're going to see is that it will be increasingly mainstream, that we're very successful. And on that I lay my case, and I hope it has been of interest to you. Thank you very much.